Okay, so let's start. So um, lesson 6, Introduction to Web Development. Today we're going to cover creating a navbar. And as always, this lesson is recorded on the Alphademic YouTube channel. So before we start, some logistics. First, this lesson will be the last of CSS in this course. So we'll finish CSS today, and then at the end we'll have like a 15 or 10 minute HTML/CSS pop quiz. And then we'll also have answer explanations afterwards. And then we'll also start, so next week we'll start covering JavaScript for the last few lessons. And then finally, I know I said I would cover Bootstrap today, but actually based on, I think, the information that we have to cover, I'll move Bootstrap to the end of the course because it's a little bit more advanced CSS framework stuff. So that'll be the last 2 lessons or last 1 lesson. And so today we're going to be, everything we're learning today is going to be based around making a navbar. So a navbar, a navigation bar, is just a bar, like a bar with all the buttons on it. For example, in this screenshot of the Apple website, there's a navbar here. You can click all these buttons on the website. Say on basically all websites, there's usually a navbar for you to click on. For example, Google Drive here, this navigation bar here, you can click on it and stuff. There's 2 of them. Yeah, so everything we're doing today is just going to be purely focused on creating a navbar, because I think that's one of the more important and cooler things to make in HTML and CSS. So last lesson we learned a lot of things, mostly CSS properties. We covered text line justify, which basically just makes all the text justified and line up on the same line on both sides. Text transform property, which just makes everything uppercase, lowercase, or make all the first letters of each word uppercase. Text indent, used to edit the size of the indentation. And then Google Fonts API, which is, and font family to change the fonts of the text. Wait, can you all hear me? My mic on. Okay, so oh, and also font weight, font style, text decoration, used to make something bold, italicized, or underlined. Font size, used to change the size of the text. Those are just some properties we learned last week. We also learned how to create a button and edit links using the pseudo classes link, visited, hover, active to change what the link looks like in different states. For example, hover when you're hovering over the link. So that's what we learned last time. And this time we'll learn how to create a navbar. But first, we're going to cover a few more CSS properties that are required to create a navbar. And I'll just go through these not very quickly, just relatively quickly. So first, we have the CSS display property. So remember a few lessons ago, we covered that there is both inline and block level elements. So remember, block level elements always start on a new line and take up the whole width of the screen as far as it can go. And also remember that inline elements take up only as much space as they need and do not start on a new line. So inline elements are like the link element and the image element. So in some cases, you might want to override the default display value. So sometimes you want an inline element to become a block element or the other way around. And that's where the CSS display property comes into play, where we can override the default display value. So for example, if you wanted to have a horizontal list, usually lists are vertical, right? We have bullet points going up and down. If you wanted to make a list horizontal, then you can turn all the list elements into inline elements. So then they'll go horizontal side by side. That's just an example. You'll see why we need to override this in a few slides, but there are three main values that you can have for the display value. You can force the element to become an inline element, or you can force it to become a block level element. Or there's a third option called inline block value, which basically it's like a combinated form of inline and block, the combined form, combinated. So it's very similar to inline. It doesn't start on a new line or anything. And then, but usually for inline elements, you cannot edit the width and height or the vertical margins and padding. So if you do inline block, you can set the width and height, and also the vertical top and bottom margins and paddings. So it's basically like an inline element, except you can edit the padding and margin for them. And by override, I mean like you force it to become an inline even when it's by default block. So you can force it to become a different type of display value. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to do it in my example website here, just for demonstration purposes. And it's loading. Okay. Okay, it's connected now. So yeah, so as an example, and this is just for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to leave it on my website because I'm just using it to demonstrate. So let's say, remember IMG and A elements are both inline elements. So if I put a link right after an IMG, then, oops, link, then you'll see that the link will just stay right next to the IMG, to the right of it. It won't create a new line or anything. And just to demonstrate the display value, if I override it, if I turn the A value into a block level element, then it should start on a new line, right? So block, and like I said before, that just overrides it, and now it displays on a new line because it's a block level element. So and you'll see the applications for that pretty soon. That's just to demonstrate what it does. You can override it, or yeah. Okay, so there's some questions here. Somebody clicked fork and then it deleted your REPL. Version control, I mean, I'm not sure how to get it back if you did something to it. I've never clicked, I don't even know where the fork button is, but if you clicked fork, I would recommend trying to go back to the home page for REPL.it and then try to, let's say, REPL.it, right? You can go to My REPLs, and perhaps your old REPL is in this list, and then you can edit again. Otherwise, you're probably going to have to like remake your website, which is really depressing, but yeah, you have to do it then. So Yeah, so next slide. So there's another property called float. So float. So basically, the float property specifies how an element will float. So you can tell it to float to the left or to the right of something, not to the center. You center it using other things, but basically, in this example here, for example, you want the image to float to the right, directly to the right of the P element. So by using the float property, um, you can make the image directly to the right of the element. So imagine these are two boxes. Usually the P would take up the whole space, but if you tell the IMG to float to the right, it'll slide to the right, right next to the P. In this case, this image element is actually before, in the syntax, is actually before the paragraph. But we're going to use float to slide the links in a navbar to make them slide to the left. And you'll see the applications for that really soon. But just know that we can use float to make a group of elements slide to the left or to the right. So, and then next slide, we have aligning things. Obviously, for text, you can just use text align center to center align your text. So but if you wanted to center align the element as opposed to just the text, so the element, for example, in a div, you wanted it to be in the center, then how do you center an element as opposed to the text? So you want to center the whole element. How do you do that? If it's a block element, you set the margins to auto. So basically, what you do is if you set the margins to auto, so usually you give the margins a size if you want to edit it, but if you set the margins to auto, then the computer will automatically calculate how much space should be on the left and right sides of that element. And then basically it'll have the same amount of space of margin to the left as to the right, and then therefore your element will be centered. For inline elements like images, if you wanted to center them, you can set the display value, force it to become a block level element, and then set the margins to auto. So in the example website here, right now the image is centered. That's because I've told the whole body section to be text align center. And if we do that in the body section, it'll align everything. But I'm just gonna, for example purposes, I'm just gonna comment that out. And now everything's not centered. So let's say you wanted to center this image, right? And you don't have that line in there because maybe not all of your text is centered. So what you would do is, if you follow the steps that I had in that slide, first you target the image using the selector, and then set the display value to block, and then now it's a block level element, and then you set the margin to auto. And then if you run it, you'll notice that the image is centered because since it's a block level element and you're editing the margins will be respected, and then the computer will automatically calculate how much margin should be on each side, and then assign that amount of margin to each side so that it'll be centered. Yeah, so those are the steps to center an inline element. I'm going to get rid of that because I already have it centered using this line. But in case you don't have everything text align centered already, then you can do that. Finally, the final property we're going to do is list style type. This property just allows you to change the bullet point type for a list. You can, by default, it's the unordered list by default is just a black circle. And then ordered list by default is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you wanted to change it to some of these preset bullet points, you can do that. And just to demonstrate, for these bullet points here, let's say I wanted to target let's say I wanted to make them lower alpha style type, lower alpha numerical bullet points. We can do lower alpha. And then if you run it, you'll notice that now the bullet points are a different type of bullet point. But for now, for our purposes, we're trying to make a navbar. So we don't care about the bullet points in a navbar. Usually in a navbar, you don't see the bullet points. So for our purposes, we're going to use list style type to remove the bullet points. So if we put list style type none, it'll remove the bullet points. So in this case, you'll see the bullet points are disappeared. Yeah, so I also did that just to show you guys, but I'm going to replace it, go back to normal now. And so that comes to our ultimate goal, which is to create a nav bar. So a navigation bar, remember nav bar is just this thing with a list of buttons in it. It's just a horizontal list of links. So you could create, so in this case, we have a list, an unordered list, and then we have these link elements inside of these list elements. And then you'll see this is just like a simple unordered list of links, nothing special, right? We can turn this into a navbar like that. So in this slide, I'm going to explain the steps to creating a very simple navbar. So creating a very simple navbar like this, a static, really boring navbar, but still much better than just having a list of links like that. So a very simple navbar here. So I'm just going to walk you through this example syntax. So we have in our HTML here, we have a list, right? An unordered list, or you can do ordered, it doesn't really matter. And then we have hyperlink elements inside of each list element. So you can place those inside because they're text, they're technically text. So we have each link element in here inside of each list element. And note that, like I said before, when you put the target to the link URL to that page, if you don't have a URL yet, you can just put a hashtag in there and it'll not do anything. So now we have a list of links, right? Then the first thing we have to do, and you should, generally speaking, you should try to follow these steps. In our CSS here, we'll have, first we target the unordered list, so the wrapper class, the UL or the OL. And then first we're going to do list style type none. So remember, that'll get rid of the bullet points. And then we'll set the margin and padding to 0. Now, why do we do that? We do that because in a list, by default, if you just have a plain list, bullet pointed list on your HTML, and if you have it like plain, it'll actually have a default set margin and padding. So then instead of starting like normal text, instead of starting directly on the left side, the list will start maybe a little bit over here instead of like directly from the left side. So we set the margin and padding to 0 to get rid of that default padding and margin. Next, we'll target each list element to float left. So what that'll do is that'll make each list element float, slide in next to each other towards the left. And then finally, we target the hyperlink values inside of each link element. So you might notice something a little bit unique about this selector. Instead of just having like a single word selector, we have li and then space a. So, and this is a little bit advanced, but just for creating navigation bar, I'll briefly explain what the space does. So what the space does is, if you have, in this example here, right, you have an li and another li that encloses the a tags in here. So li is enclosing each link, right? So you could say that this a link is a descendant of the li elements because it's inside of the li's. So when we put a space there, that means that the selector is targeting the descendant of this element. So in this case, we're targeting the descendant of this li. And what kind of descendant are we targeting? We're targeting the a tags, the a tag descendants of each li element. So when we do that, we're actually targeting each a tag inside of each li. And then so we're targeting the a tags this time. And what do? We first change the display value to a block level element. So why do we change the a tag to a block level element? First, the reason why we do that is because if we change it to a block level element, then the whole background area, including the background color, is clickable. So by default, if it's an inline, we can only click the links. But if we change it to a block, the whole background color area, padding area of that link is clickable. So we can click over like to the side a little bit, not directly on the link, and it's still clickable. And then finally, we add some padding to give each link a little bit more space in between each other. And then we add a background color to make it look a little bit nicer. So that is just a very, very simple static navbar that is kind of boring, right? Now, how do we make a more complex navbar that's a little bit more, you could say, looks better, or it's a little bit more interactive or more professional looking? So I'll just call that a complex navbar. And how do we do that? Well, I'll explain it to you while demonstrating the example on my example website. So first thing you have to do is choose where your navbar should be. So, right, where you want your navbar to be. So in this case, I want my navbar to be directly under this title area, and then, but above the image. So I'll create the list of links right under this title section, right? So unordered list, and then we have closing tag. And then the first list element, we're going to list element, and then we'll make a hyperlink in here, href equals, and then we'll just put a hashtag there as a placeholder. And then the link name. So first we'll have a home page /a, and then close off the element. 1, 2, and I'll just put 4 of them here. So home, and then let's say blog, and then about us, and then contact us. And then now if you run it, you'll notice now we have a bullet pointed list of links that don't actually go anywhere because I made them hashtag, go link to hashtag. So it doesn't actually do anything if you click it right now. So then next, what we're going to do is I'm going to assign each of these elements a class, and I'll just call it navbar. And then we can just assign each of the list elements the same class too. And there's an easier way to do this, but right now we're just going to do it that way just because it's simple. So now we've created the list of links, and we have targeted each li, right? Now we can actually turn it into a navbar. So the first thing we're going to do is remember the previous example, we're going to first target the UL, the unordered list, so the wrapper class. So ul.navbar. So we're targeting the unordered list elements inside of that are navbar class. And remember, the first thing we're going to do is list style type, and then so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all the bullet points, because in a navbar you don't want to see the bullet points. And then second thing I'm going to do is make a background color, and then I'll make it RGB 47, 45, 82. And then now if you run it, there's a really ugly background color. But we'll change the text color later to make it more visible. Finally, we're going to change the default padding and make it 0, and do the same with the margin, 0. And then now if we run it, there's no padding or margin. And then finally, the final property that we're going to do in targeting the UL is that we're going to do a property called overflow hidden. So we didn't cover the overflow property in this course, and we're probably not going to cover it, but because it's a little bit more advanced property. But basically we need to use it for our navbar. So basically what the overflow property does is, if our text is too long, then if we assign the value hidden, then this text will be cut off. The overflowed text will be cut off. But the purpose we have it in our navbar is because when we're going to assign the float to float left, right? So that'll actually mess up the flow of this web page. So we assign this so that the flow of the links will be good, and then it'll each slide next to each other. And you'll see what I mean by that in a few lines. So next, we're going to target the list elements of the navbar, right? li.navbar, so all LIs with the navbar class. And then we're going to make it float left. And then now you'll notice it's pretty ugly, but now everything's floating to the left and it's not vertical. And then finally, we're going to target the descendants of the li elements, so all the a tags inside of the li. So remember that we have the space there to target the descendant. And then first, we're going to make display block, because like I said before, that just makes the whole background area clickable. Next, we're going to make the color white. And then now the text is a little bit more visible. It still looks really ugly, but it's a little bit more visible, right? It's a white color against like a dark blue background. Finally, we're going to make the text align center so that each text, all of the text inside of each element is centered inside their own blocks. And then we'll make the padding a little bit bigger at 15 pixels. That way there's a little bit more space in between each of them, so it's not jumbled together like that. And also the height of it is a little bit thicker, so it's easier to click. And then finally, we're going to change the font size to make the font a little bit bigger, and I chose 20 pixels. That way the font's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit easier to see and easier to click. Now that's okay, it looks okay. But there's a few things that we can do to make it look a little bit better. First thing is we're going to remove the text decoration. So the text decoration, we're going to remove the underlines in each one. So now there's no underline for the link. And then in order to make it a little bit more interactive, we can make the background color change when the link is being hovered upon. So bar a hover, right? We target the hover state, and then we can change the background color to RGB 16, 31, and then 53. And then now you'll notice that if we hover over the link, the background color will change to a little bit darker black. And that just makes it feel a little bit better. Okay, so let's answer some questions. How long is this class? The class is going to be about an hour long, so around 4 o'clock we'll end. If you want the HTML navbar code, I'll send it in the chat. So this is the HTML code, and then the CSS code. I'll just send it in here too. So that's the CSS code. Yeah, so that's that. So now we have this navbar here, and you can change the spacing if you want to make it center or have more buttons or whatever. But now comes the question, how do you make it link to actually different sites? First of all, we can just insert a URL here to whatever different site you want it to be. But what if you wanted to link back to another page of your website? Well, first, we have to learn how to create another page of the website, right? And how do we do that? We can make another HTML file here in the file manager here. So this time I'll name it blog.html because there's a page called blog here. And then if we click enter, then we have another HTML document. So this represents another page. There's nothing in here yet. If we run it, if we go to this page, it'll literally just become like a white page. It has nothing on it. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to put like some text in it so you can see the page when it pops up. So first, we have to do doc type HTML, and then we have the HTML wrapper elements, and then we have the head elements / head, and also the body elements, body. And then I'm just going to show you that the page actually exists later when we click it. I'll just give it an H1 called blog / H1. And literally that page just has nothing on it except for this heading called blog. So so how do we link to this page? Well, if we go back to our list of links, we can make the link go to the HTML page by putting in the file name in here. And then now, since it's targeting there, if we click the blog link, it'll go to that page. Now, obviously, there's nothing on that page right now because we have added literally only the H1. And in order to get back to the home page, we would have to have another navbar here and add all the text and stuff. But that's just how you have a different link to a different page of your website. So somebody asking me, how did you create the blog.html? Like I said before, in the file manager to the left here, there's this one page button here that says add file. You add file and you put a name, whatever name, about, and then do .html for if you want an HTML file. Yeah, so that's how you do that. Now, you might be wondering, how do you link to a CSS page from this website, from this site, HTML page? You can link to the same CSS page there. So if we do that, this is the same CSS reference. and we go to the blog, now you'll notice that it has the same CSS as in the home page, and it has this purplish background. Obviously, there's not a lot of other stuff because I haven't put any other stuff, but you can use the same CSS page. And for all those people that are like asking questions, like how do you get rid of the bullet points? I posted the slides into the Google Classroom, so you can look at those slides while you're um, listening to my presentation. But I'll say it again. So how do you remove the bullet points? You use a property list style type none while you're targeting the UL wrapper element. And then how do you make the navbar horizontal? You do float and target float to the left. So yeah. And then now we're gonna have a pop quiz. It should take 10 minutes. If you go to I'll also post this link into the chat, but if you go to the presentation I posted on the Google Classroom, this link is also on the last slide. But that's just a pop quiz. I would recommend you to take out a piece of paper, write down the question number for each question, and then write down the answer. Yeah. And then you know what? It should only take 10 minutes, not 15 minutes. So I guess I'll put a timer on, and then I can give you guys 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, we'll review everything. And I'll also, during this time, I'll also answer some questions through the chat if you have any other questions. So feel free to start the quiz right now. You have 10 minutes. Okay. Oops. So if you want to see my HTML and CSS pages, yeah, and then I'll answer some questions right now. Right. So you should be done on the quiz by now. I'm just going to go through the answers and give some explanations, and then the class should be over. I think there's a lot of questions, so I'll try my best to answer all of them after we review this quiz. So question one, what does HTML stand for? Hypertext Markup Language. Yeah, that's an easy fact-based question. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, because each block is cascading and like on top of each other. What is the correct CSS syntax? The correct one is, oh, there's no C, but it's D. We have the selector, and then inside of the brackets, we have property, and then the property value. How do you insert a comment in a CSS file? You do the slash and then the asterisk. Yeah, B. What is the correct HTML for inserting an image? So first we can rule B out because there's no tag called image. And then, okay, so, and then we're left with A, C, and D. The way you put the source link for the image is using src attribute, and then we have the alt. So this is the correct one. How do you open a link in a new browser window? So we covered that like the first or second class, but basically you use the target attribute, and you target blank, so that'll open it up in a new browser window. So A is the correct answer for there. Headings go from, okay, headings go from H1 to H6. And if you have any questions right now, can you, if you would please hold them to like the end of this review, and then I can answer all of them. What is the correct HTML for creating a hyperlink? It's definitely not this. It's also not this because we don't use the src attribute in the hyperlink. This is the correct answer because we have the href attribute in the opening tag, and then we have the hyperlink text and then the closing tag. Which CSS property applies a color to text? The correct answer is D. The color property changes the color to a text. This changes the background color. This doesn't exist, and this doesn't exist either. What does the ID selector do? The ID selector targets one specific element. So the answer would be A, because it only applies the style to a specific element. What selector should you use when applying a style to multiple elements? First of all, the D answer that selector doesn't exist. So we're left with A, B, C. The correct answers are B and C, because you can assign the same class to multiple elements. You can also target multiple elements if they're all of the same type. So the correct answer is B and C. ID you can only apply to one single element, so that's not a correct answer. Which of the following attributes of the img tag displays alternate text for the image? That's the alt attribute. So if you remember, if an image doesn't display properly, or it can't display the image, then the alternative text will just be displayed. Or if you have somebody who has visual disabilities, if they're blind and they're using a text reader that reads to them what the website says, then the reader will just say the alternative text instead of saying like an image or something. where in the HTML document is the correct place to refer to an external style sheet? So where do we refer, where do we link this HTML page to a CSS file? And the correct answer is in the head section. If you go into your REPL, you'll notice that this element here links this page, this HTML page, to this CSS file, and it's inside of the head element. So C is a correct answer. Which HTML tag is used to define an internal style sheet? So an internal style sheet is a style sheet that's inside the HTML file, and it's inside the head element. And the correct answer is B, style. Anything inside these, oops, what the? Okay, so the correct answer is B only, because anything, all the stuff inside of these two, the opening and closing style tags are supposed to be CSS syntax. 15, what type of CSS is written inside the first tag of an HTML element? The correct answer is inline CSS. That's the CSS we have inside an HTML tag if you want to add it there. 16, A hover and A active are both examples of what? They're both examples of pseudo classes. If you remember, like last lesson, we talked about pseudo classes where specifically for links, where we can assign a style to a specific state of that element. So in this case, the state is when we're hovering over that button or that link, that is a state. And in this case, the active state means that what the moment that we click the link. So those are different states. What is the default pixel size for P text? This was a little detail that I mentioned a few lessons ago. The default pixel size is 16 pixels. That you just need to memorize that. It's just a fact-based question. Which of the following statements is not correct? A, classes are identified by a number sign or a hashtag. B, classes are identified with a dot. C, IDs are identified with a number sign. So the correct answer is A, because that is incorrect. Classes are identified with a dot and IDs are identified with a number sign. So this is the incorrect answer. Therefore, it is correct because the question is asking for the incorrect answer. 19, you can use the same class on multiple elements. The answer is true. Classes, by definition, are supposed to be applied to several different elements. Number 20, you can add multiple classes to the same element. That is also true. You can assign several classes to the same element if you want, like overlapping style on that element. And you can separate them by a space, and then you can add multiple classes of the same element. 21, you can add the same IDs to multiple elements. That's false. IDs can only be used on one specific element. 22, what is the difference between margins and padding? Remember, padding is inside the border and margins is the space outside of the border. So the correct answer would be E, because padding adds white space inside the border versus margins is outside of the border. 22, from the inside out, which of the following portrays the correct order of a box model? So remember, a few lessons ago, we covered the box model. In the innermost box is the content, and then around the content is a padding, around the padding is a border, and then around the border is a margin. So the correct answer is D. What is the purpose of doc.type HTML? And two options. A is to declare that this document is an HTML document, and B, it provides the web browser with meta information. The correct answer is A, because this line here, the purpose is to tell the browser that it is reading an HTML file. Number 25, the page title is inside the blank tag. So the title tag, the title element, is supposed to be in the head element. It's supposed to be element, not tag. Oops. Number 26 is doc type HTML a mandatory line in HTML. True, it must be written at the top of every HTML file, or false, it's not mandatory. The correct answer is B. It's actually not mandatory. Most web browsers will identify that it's an HTML file, usually. But it's good practice to do that, just to declare the version of HTML that the document is going to be written in. 28, the body tag usually is used after which tag? It's usually, the body element is usually after the head tag. The head tag comes first and the body comes second. 29, web pages start with which of the following tags? This is a very vague question, but the answer is C. All HTML files start, or all the HTML is enclosed in the HTML element wrapper class, or wrapper element. Which of the following tag is used to mark the beginning of a paragraph? This is very easy. It's P, the P element, or the P tag. 31, if you want to define a style for a unique element, then which CSS selector will we use? The correct answer is the ID selector, because we can only assign the ID to one specific element. Or you could use inline CSS, but it's your choice. 32, which of the following is correct about CSS? CSS is used to control the style of a web document in a simple and easy way. B, CSS is an acronym for Cascading Style Sheet. And C, you can write CSS once and then reuse the same sheet in multiple HTML pages. So all three of these are correct. You can link to the same style sheet in different pages. So D is the correct answer. And to those that are wondering where's the 27th problem, I deleted that problem, so it's not there anymore, and I forgot to switch the numbers. 33. What is the correct HTML for referring to an external style sheet? If you looked into your own code, you should have found that the correct answer is B. The style sheet element doesn't even exist. This is, you're not supposed to do that. The style element is for internal CSS. Finally, number 34, can you set the width, height, and vertical margins / paddings in inline elements? The correct answer is actually no, but this question is a badly worded question. The fact of the matter is you can set the vertical margins and paddings in inline elements, they just won't be respected. So what does that mean? That means that like they won't be recognized. And so it won't affect the HTML, the text around it. So that is the end of the review, and then that's the end of class. Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. And now if you have any questions, you can ask me. Bye, everyone. Yes, I'll post the answer key in the classroom. I'll post it after class. Yeah.